Rain had already soaked Clara's coat by the time she stepped out of the taxi. Windmere Hollow was even gloomier than she remembered. Gray skies hung low over the sweeping hills, and a mist clung to the treetops like ghostly fingers. Hensley Manor stood at the end of a gravel path, half hidden behind thick ivy and shadowed stone. She hadn't seen the house in nearly 10 years. As she reached the iron gate, its hinges groaned in protest, as though the estate itself resented her return. Clara walked up the drive, her boots crunching on wet gravel, heart thumping with a mixture of dread and disbelief. Her father was gone. Just like that. No warning. No goodbye. Inside, the manor was cold. Not just physically, but in the way that no warmth had touched its walls in a long time. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the corridor, their oil-painted gazes following her with quiet judgment. Clara paused at the bottom of the grand staircase, eyes drawn upwards, then to the side, towards the drawing room. That was where the reading of the will would take place. Ms. Penelope Briggs, the family solicitor, greeted her with a tight nod. She looked smaller than Clara remembered, her once red hair now dulled with gray. Lucas was already seated by the fireplace, back straight, expression unreadable. Clara sat opposite him, tension crackling like the fire beside them. Ms. Briggs opened a thin leather folder and began to read. To my son, Lucas Hensley, I leave Hensley Manor and all assets attached to the family estate. Nothing else. Clara blinked. That's it? She asked, voice hoarse. Miss Briggs gave her a look that wasn't quite pity. Your father left no instructions regarding you. Lucas spoke then, his tone almost casual. He made his choice, Clara. You left. Clara stood slowly. He called me a week before he died. He said something was coming. He said everything would make sense. Lucas's gaze flickered. Just for a second. You misunderstood. But Clara wasn't so sure. As she left the room, a low creak echoed from upstairs. A door, long sealed she thought, had opened. Or been opened. She turned to the staircase. And froze. At the top, just beyond the banister, a light flickered on. One that hadn't worked in years. Something had begun. Clara stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, staring up at the flickering light. For a moment, the house fell silent, as though holding its breath with her. The bulb above the old study, her father's study, flickered again before dying completely, plunging the corridor into darkness once more. She waited. Nothing moved. Lucas had not followed her out of the parlor. The fire still crackled behind him, a warm glow that somehow felt detached from the chill that was quickly seeping into Clara's bones. Slowly, she climbed the staircase. The steps creaked beneath her weight, familiar and unsettling all at once. Halfway up, she reached for the handrail, only to recoil. It was wet. Her fingers were damp with something dark and sticky. She stepped into the light from a nearby wall sconce and saw the smear. Deep crimson. Paint. The study door stood slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Dust rose in the air, motes dancing in the faint light from a narrow window. The room smelled of tobacco and old books. Her father's scent still lingered in the leather chair by the fireplace. The desk was neat, too neat. Everything in perfect order, untouched, as though waiting for its master to return. But Clara knew her father had not been in this room for days before his death. She stepped closer to the fireplace. There, tucked between the bricks and mantel, was something protruding, a scrap of paper. Gently, she pulled it free. A torn page from a letter, stained and brittle. Only a few words were legible. Not safe. If Lucas knows. Burn it. Her heart thudded. Burn what? What had he hidden? And why fear Lucas? She glanced toward the tall bookcase beside the desk. Her father had once told her, half joking, that every old house needs a secret or two. She ran her hand along the spines of the books, testing for movement. One shifted slightly. She pulled it. With a faint click, a panel beside the shelf creaked open. Behind it was a narrow alcove. Not large enough to step into, but just wide enough to conceal a stack of objects. Old diaries. A folded cloth. A tin box. She reached inside, pulling out the box first. Inside, a collection of keys. None labeled. Her breath caught when she noticed the smallest one, a delicate silver key, etched with her father's initials. She took it, heart racing. A door in the house had once required a key like that, but she couldn't recall which. She picked up one of the diaries, opened it. Pages were ripped, ink smudged, but the name Lucas appeared again and again, surrounded by frantic scribbles, lines drawn through entire entries. Then the floor creaked behind her. Clara turned sharply. No one there. But as she stepped out of the study, she saw something that made her breath hitch. One of the portraits in the hall, the grand one of her great-grandfather, had been turned to face the wall. It hadn't been like that before. And on the floor beneath it, a fresh footprint, still wet. Clara's heart raced as her eyes locked onto the footprint. It was fresh, the edges still faintly glistening with moisture, and it led from the portrait to the wall. She leaned closer, trying to catch her breath. A chill spread through her veins as the weight of what she was seeing hit her. She could feel the presence of something sinister in the air, thickening around her like a fog. The house had always felt alive, but tonight, it felt more like a tomb, a place that was hiding something buried beneath its walls, its floors, its portraits. She knelt down and examined the footprint closely. It was too large to be hers, but it wasn't the size that worried her. It was the way it was positioned. It looked as though someone had been hurriedly moving in the direction of the study. The same direction she had come from. Clara glanced back over her shoulder. The study door creaked slightly, still ajar. She had not seen Lucas follow her upstairs, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he had been close, watching her every move. She stood up, shaking the unease from her body. There was no time to waste. The truth was just out of reach, but she could feel it, tugging at the edges of her mind. She had to get inside her father's study. She had to see what was hidden there. With a final glance at the odd-turned portrait, Clara made her way back to the study. This time, she pushed the door open fully. The light had returned, flickering, weak, but enough to reveal what lay inside. The room looked the same, yet Clara felt something had changed. The air was different, heavier, as if the room was holding its breath. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, the soft click of the lock echoing in the silence. The box with the keys still lay on the desk. Clara turned it over in her hands again, but something caught her eye. On the desk, next to the box, was a small brass key with a ribbon tied to it. She hadn't seen it before. Her fingers brushed the key, and instantly, the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. This was no ordinary key. She could sense that it was important. It had been placed here deliberately, as though waiting for her to find it. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned to the bookshelf. The silver key from the secret compartment was still clenched tightly in her other hand. Could these keys open the same door? Her mind raced, piecing together the fragmented clues. The letters. The smudged ink. The footprints. And now, the strange key on her father's desk. She needed to know more. She had to find the door that this key belonged to. Before she could make another move, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Clara froze. Her pulse quickened as she turned toward the door, her thoughts spiraling. It couldn't be Lucas. He hadn't been in the house for hours. But the footsteps were unmistakable. They were slow, purposeful, heavy. Someone was coming. Clara pressed herself against the desk, clutching the keys, her breath shallow. The room was dim, and she hoped that whoever was approaching wouldn't notice her hiding in the shadows. She heard the footsteps stop just outside the door. A muffled cough. The door handle turned. Clara's heart skipped a beat. The door creaked open slowly. The door creaked open, and Clara held her breath, her body frozen against the desk. She could see the outline of someone standing in the doorway, their figure barely visible in the dim light of the study. The footsteps had stopped. Silence had enveloped the room once again. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. She could not afford to make a sound. Whoever it was, they had to know she was here. This was no coincidence. Her fingers tightened around the keys, but she didn't move. Her thoughts raced. Should she confront them? Or should she wait and see who dared to step into her father's study, a place that had always been off-limits to everyone except him? The figure lingered in the doorway for a moment longer before stepping inside. Clara's eyes strained to make out the person's face. A tall, broad-shouldered man. He wore a dark coat that blended with the shadows. His face was partially obscured by the low light, but Clara could tell it wasn't Lucas. This man was different. His presence alone sent a shiver down her spine. He closed the door behind him with a soft click, much like Clara had done moments before. For a moment, there was nothing but stillness. The man didn't move, didn't speak. Clara didn't dare to either. Then slowly the man began to speak, his voice low and gravelly. "You shouldn't have come here, Clara," he said, his tone calm but filled with an unmistakable undercurrent of menace. Clara's breath caught in her throat. He knew her name. And that, more than anything, sent a chill straight through her. How did he know her? And why was he here? She didn't speak. Instead, she continued to watch him closely, trying to make sense of the situation. Was this another piece of the puzzle? Another thread in a web of deception that had been spun in her father's name? The man took another step toward her, his shoes softly scraping against the wooden floor. He didn't seem to notice her hiding behind the desk, or perhaps he didn't care. Either way, he was moving closer. The dim light flickered again, and Clara's pulse quickened. She couldn't just sit there. She had to act. But what could she do? The man reached the desk and leaned down, his face coming into clearer view. Clara's breath hitched. It was Mr. Grantham, the family solicitor. The very same man who had read the will earlier. But something about him had changed. His eyes were no longer warm and reassuring. They were cold. Empty. "You're looking for answers, aren't you?" Mr. Grantham asked, his voice almost a whisper now, but still tinged with that cold menace. "You're not going to find them in here. Not the way you think." Clara's mind raced. Why was he here? Was he involved in what had happened to her father? Was he the one who had been tampering with the will? Or was there something else going on? Something much darker than she could imagine? Mr. Grantham straightened up, his eyes lingering on the keys in Clara's hand, the brass key with the ribbon tied around it. His gaze was sharp, calculating. "I see you found it," he murmured, more to himself than to Clara. "I suppose it was only a matter of time." Clara's mind went into overdrive. The key. The one her father had hidden. The one that could lead her to the truth. "What do you know about this?" Clara demanded, her voice shaky but determined. She stepped out from behind the desk, holding the key up between them, the weight of it heavy in her hand. Mr. Grantham didn't respond right away. He simply studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he spoke again, his voice low and almost regretful. "You really have no idea, do you?" he said, almost sadly. "You think you've uncovered the truth, but you haven't even scratched the surface." Clara's mind reeled. What did that mean? What was he trying to tell her? Before she could press further, a loud crash sounded from the hallway outside the study. Clara's heart skipped a beat. "Stay here," Mr. Grantham said sharply, his voice changing in an instant from calm to urgent. He turned abruptly and rushed to the door. Clara stood frozen, the key still clutched in her hand. The crash had sounded like something heavy falling. But what had happened? Who was out there? Her pulse throbbed in her ears as Mr. Grantham opened the door and stepped into the hallway, his footsteps echoing as he moved quickly. Clara didn't hesitate. She had to follow him. She had to know what was going on. She moved swiftly, quietly, crossing the room and peeking through the crack in the door. What she saw made her stomach drop. Edward. He was standing at the far end of the hallway, his face pale and drawn. He was holding something in his hand. Something small and metallic. Before Clara could react, Mr. Grantham appeared behind him, his face filled with shock. "Edward, what are you doing?" Mr. Grantham's voice was strained, the urgency clear in his tone. Edward didn't answer. He simply looked at Clara, his eyes filled with fear and something else, something that made Clara's blood run cold. The hallway felt cold, almost suffocating, as Clara's eyes locked onto Edward. The metallic object in his hand gleamed under the dim light. Her heart raced, her breath shallow, as she tried to make sense of the moment. Why was Edward holding something so small, so strange? It was an old coin, she realized, glinting with a dull, almost antique shine. Edward's face twisted into something between guilt and desperation. He held the coin tightly in his hand, fingers curling around it as though it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. The silence stretched for what seemed like an eternity. Clara wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she simply watched, her eyes darting between Mr. Grantham and her brother, trying to piece together this new puzzle. Mr. Grantham was the first to speak, his voice sharp with authority. "Edward, you need to put that down right now," he commanded. His voice was firm, his posture rigid as he took a cautious step toward Edward. But Edward didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on Clara, his lips pressed together as though he were fighting an internal battle. Clara couldn't understand it. This wasn't the Edward she had known, the brother she had grown up with. This man, this stranger standing in front of her, was someone she didn't recognize. "I can't," Edward muttered, his voice strained, barely above a whisper. I have to keep it safe. For her. For Mum." Clara's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice rising. "What's going on, Edward? What is that coin? And why were you at the house the night Dad died?" Edward shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "It's not what you think," he choked out. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But Mum, she asked me to do it. She told me to keep it hidden." Clara was still trying to process his words when Mr. Grantham took another step forward. "Enough, Edward," he said, his tone softer now, but with an edge of finality. "You've made your choice. There's no going back." Clara's mind was spinning, trying to make sense of it all. Her father's death. The will. Edward's strange behavior. The coin. What did it all mean? And why was Mr. Grantham involved in all of this? Her head was spinning, and she could feel a rising sense of panic. She stepped forward, closer to Edward, her eyes never leaving the coin in his hand. "You can't hide behind Mum's name, Edward," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and confusion. "What did you do? Tell me the truth." Edward's face crumpled. He couldn't hold it together any longer. The tears finally spilled over, and he dropped to his knees in the hallway, clutching the coin to his chest. "I didn't want to," he sobbed, his voice breaking. "But she said it would be the only way to get everything. To make sure she got what she deserved." Clara's breath caught in her throat. Who told you this? What are you talking about?" Edward's eyes locked with hers, and for the first time in a long while, Clara saw the desperation in his gaze. "Mum. She's the one who made me do it. She wanted the house. The money. Everything. And she told me that if I helped her, if I did what she said, we could have it all." Clara's mind was reeling. Her mother? Her own mother had been involved in something so sinister? She couldn't believe it. But the pieces were starting to fall into place. The strange behavior. The sudden change in Edward. The secrecy. And then, just as suddenly, a thought hit Clara like a bolt of lightning. "What about the will?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "What does this have to do with the will, Edward?" For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Edward's eyes flickered to Mr. Grantham, and Clara could see the hesitation in his gaze. He was torn, trapped between loyalty and guilt. "Dad didn't leave everything to you," Edward finally whispered, his voice shaking. "He left it to her. To Mum. But when he died, she didn't get it. The will was wrong, Clara. It wasn't what Dad wanted. It was forged." Clara's stomach twisted, the room spinning around her. "Forged," she repeated, barely able to process the words. "Are you saying the will was fake?" Edward nodded, his face pale with the weight of his confession. "Yes," he whispered. "She made me do it. She said if we could change the will, if we could make it look like Dad left everything to her, she would make sure I was taken care of. She promised me." Clara's world shattered in that moment. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. It was all too much. She wanted to scream, to run away, to forget all of it. But there was no escaping the truth now. Edward had been part of this scheme. He had helped forge the will. He had been complicit in the betrayal of their father. And worse still, he had done it all at the behest of their mother. Clara turned to Mr. Grantham, her voice shaky with disbelief. "Why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you stop them from doing this?" Mr. Grantham's expression hardened. "I tried," he said quietly. "I tried to warn him. But Edward, he didn't listen. He was too far gone." The truth was now clear. The will had been forged, and Edward had been a willing participant. But Clara was not done yet. There was still one thing she needed to know. "Where is Mum now?" she asked, her voice steady, but with a growing sense of dread. What happened to her? Edward's eyes flickered with fear. She's gone, he whispered. She disappeared after Dad died. No one knows where she went. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The web of lies had just become even more tangled. And now, more than ever, she needed to uncover the rest of the truth. Clara stood motionless in the hallway, the weight of Edward's words hanging heavily in the air. Her mind raced, struggling to keep up with the barrage of truths that had come to light. Her mother, the woman who had always been there, had orchestrated a plan to take everything from their father. And Edward, her own brother, had willingly helped her. But the final piece of the puzzle was still missing. If their mother had truly disappeared after their father's death, why hadn't the police been called? Why wasn't anyone looking for her? Clara's thoughts spiraled, but one thing was clear. Whatever was going on, it was far more complicated than she had imagined. The silence in the old house felt suffocating, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Edward's tear-streaked face was a portrait of guilt, regret, and fear. Clara wanted to scream at him, to demand he fix everything, but she knew that the man before her was no longer the brother she had known. He was just a pawn in a much larger game. But even as her anger burned through her veins, Clara couldn't ignore the deep concern gnawing at her. Where was their mother? How could she have just vanished like that? And why was Edward so afraid? Her gaze fell to the coin still clutched tightly in his hand. It seemed almost absurd in its simplicity, yet it was the symbol of everything that had gone wrong. The catalyst for the lies, the betrayal, and the broken trust that had torn apart her family. "Edward," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. "Where is she now? What happened after Dad died?" Edward flinched, his eyes flickering nervously toward Mr. Grantham before he reluctantly lowered his gaze. He opened his mouth to speak but seemed unable to form the words. "She disappeared," he finally managed, his voice barely audible. "After the funeral. I don't know where she went. She told me she was leaving. She said she needed to take care of things. I didn't ask any questions. I just did what she told me." Clara's heart sank. This was worse than she had feared. Her mother's sudden departure could mean only one thing. She was running. Running from the consequences of her actions, from the web of lies she had woven. But where had she gone? And why was Edward so unwilling to talk about it? "You're not telling me everything," Clara said, her voice hardening. "What did you mean by take care of things? Did she leave the country? Was there someone else involved?" Edward shook his head violently. "No," he said quickly. "I don't know. She just said that I had to protect myself. That if I didn't help her, I'd lose everything. I didn't want to believe her, but I had no choice." The desperation in his voice was unmistakable. Clara's anger flared, but it was now tempered with a growing sense of dread. She was beginning to realize that her mother wasn't just a victim of the situation. She was the mastermind behind it all. Clara turned to Mr. Grantham, her eyes searching for any kind of explanation. The old lawyer had been a silent observer until now, but she needed answers. She needed someone to tell her what had really happened. "Mr. Grantham," she said, her tone urgent, "why didn't you stop this? Why didn't you intervene when you saw what was going on?" Mr. Grantham's face remained calm, but there was a flicker of regret in his eyes. He sighed heavily before answering. "I tried, Clara," he said quietly. "I tried to warn Edward, but he wouldn't listen. And as for your mother, well, she was always good at convincing people. She had a way of making everything seem like it was for the best, even when it was a lie." Clara clenched her fists at her sides. The frustration was overwhelming. She had trusted these people, her family, her lawyer, and they had all failed her. But there was something even more pressing now. Edward's actions. Her mother's disappearance. The forged will. What was the next step? "I need to find her," Clara said, determination setting into her voice. "I don't care what it takes. I need to find Mum. And I need to know why she did this." Edward looked up at her, his face pale with fear. "Clara, please. Don't. It's too dangerous. I've already done too much." But Clara wasn't listening. She was already moving, her mind focused solely on one goal. Finding her mother. Confronting her. And perhaps, putting an end to the nightmare that had shattered their family. Clara turned toward the door, her hand on the handle. But before she could step out into the rain-soaked world, she paused. Something in her gut told her that her search wouldn't be as simple as she hoped. She had no idea where her mother had gone, or how deep the web of lies ran. But one thing was certain. She was going to get to the truth, no matter the cost. As she stepped out into the storm, Clara's mind raced. Her mother's disappearance was no accident. It was part of something bigger. Something far more dangerous than she had realized. And she was about to find out just how far her mother would go to keep her secrets hidden. Clara's footsteps echoed in the empty street as she hurried through the downpour, her mind swirling with unanswered questions. The rain lashed against her skin, but it did little to cool the fire burning inside her. Her mother's sudden disappearance and Edward's cryptic words weighed heavily on her, pressing down like an invisible hand. Where was she? Clara thought about the brief exchange with Edward, his reluctance to speak, his fear, but it wasn't enough. She needed more. She had to find her mother, no matter the cost. But where to start? Clara turned down a narrow alleyway, her coat flapping in the wind. It was an area she hadn't ventured into in years, a part of town that had long been forgotten. It was a place where the town's secrets were buried, where no one asked too many questions, and where people went to disappear. She found herself standing in front of a decrepit, half-collapsed building that seemed to have been abandoned for as long as Clara could remember. The windows were boarded up, and the door was barely hanging on its hinges. But Clara knew this place. Her mother had always warned her to stay away from it. It was one of those places that never made it onto the map. But Clara now had a feeling that this was the key to everything. This run-down building might hold the answers to all of her questions. She just needed to find out what. Without hesitation, Clara pushed open the creaking door. The smell of mildew and decay hit her as she stepped inside, her eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light. The space was cluttered with old furniture and dust-covered shelves, but there was something else. A presence, a feeling that she wasn't alone. Clara's heart raced. She took cautious steps forward, every creak of the floorboards amplified in the silence. As she moved deeper into the building, she saw something on the far side of the room. A shadow, barely visible in the gloom. It was small, perhaps a figure, hunched over something. Clara's instincts told her to run, but something kept her rooted to the spot. Then the shadow moved. Clara froze, her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, everything was still, until the figure stood up. It was a woman. Her face was obscured by a hood, but Clara knew instinctively who it was. Mom. Clara's voice trembled as she took a step forward, her eyes fixed on the figure. The woman didn't respond at first. She stood there, still as a statue, her back to Clara. Then slowly she turned. Her eyes locked onto Clara's, and for a split second, everything felt like it was about to collapse. Clara, the woman said, her voice barely a whisper. You shouldn't be here. Clara's heart skipped a beat. It was her mother, but she looked different. Distant, colder, as if she were a stranger. Why did you disappear? Clara demanded, her voice gaining strength as she stepped closer. What is going on? You can't just walk away from everything from us. Her mother's expression hardened, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes. Regret, fear, maybe even guilt. But she quickly masked it. It's not what you think, she said, her voice breaking. I had no choice. I had to protect you, Clara. I had to protect both of you. Clara felt a rush of confusion. Protect us? From what? Why did you fake your disappearance? Why didn't you tell me what was happening? Her mother's face twisted with pain. Because I knew you wouldn't understand. You couldn't have. There are things you don't know, things you can't know. Clara stepped forward again, anger bubbling up inside her. I'm not a child anymore, Mum. I can handle the truth. Just tell me what's going on. Her mother hesitated, and for a moment, Clara thought she might actually tell her everything. But then the moment passed, and her mother's face hardened again. You're better off not knowing, she said, her voice flat. The less you know, the safer you'll be. Clara's chest tightened. What do you mean? Are you saying you've been hiding from us, from your own children, to protect us from the truth? Her mother didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked around the room as if searching for something. Then her gaze flicked back to Clara. This is bigger than you think. There are people involved. People who will stop at nothing to get what they want. And if I didn't disappear, if I didn't hide, they would have come for you. For both of you. Clara felt a cold chill run down her spine. Who? Who are these people? What are you talking about? But her mother remained silent, a look of utter despair on her face. Clara's mind raced. This was more than just a simple family dispute. Her mother had vanished for a reason, and that reason was tied to something much larger than she had ever imagined. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous the answers seemed to be. Just then, Clara heard footsteps behind her. She whipped around, her heart pounding, but it was too late. The door slammed shut, and the figure in the room vanished into the shadows. Clara was left standing in the dimly lit room, her mind racing, her mother's words echoing in her ears. She was no closer to understanding what had happened or what her mother had been trying to protect her from. But one thing was certain. Clara had just stepped into a much larger and far more dangerous web than she had ever imagined. Clara's breath caught in her chest as she stood alone in the abandoned building, the rain still hammering against the broken windows, filling the space with a constant, deafening rhythm. Her heart raced, a mixture of confusion and fear swirling within her. She had come here to find answers, but now she was more lost than ever. Her mother's warning echoed in her mind, a constant refrain. The less you know, the safer you'll be. But Clara couldn't stop now. Not when she was so close. She had to know the truth, even if it meant uncovering things she might never be able to unsee. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the distant sound of footsteps. Footsteps that weren't hers. She turned, her pulse quickening, and saw the silhouette of a figure approaching from the shadows. Clara's body tensed as the figure stepped forward, revealing the face of a man she had hoped she'd never see again. It was Edward. He stood there, his features cold, his expression unreadable. The rain clung to his coat, his hair damp against his forehead. His eyes locked onto Clara's, and for a moment, neither of them moved. You shouldn't have come here, Clara. Edward's voice was low, but it carried an unmistakable warning. Clara's anger flared, her fists clenching at her sides. What is going on, Edward? Why is Mum hiding from us? What's all of this about? Edward shook his head, a shadow crossing his face. You don't understand. You're in way over your head. This isn't something you can fix. I don't care, Clara shouted, taking a step toward him. I need to know the truth. Why did Mum leave us? Why did she fake her disappearance? What are you hiding? Edward's jaw tightened, and for a second, Clara thought he might actually tell her something. But then, his eyes flickered toward the door, and he seemed to hesitate. Clara followed his gaze, sensing something off. Before she could react, Edward grabbed her arm, his grip tight and forceful. You don't get it, he muttered, his voice strained. This is bigger than you. You're not ready for what's really going on. You think you want the truth, but it'll destroy you. Clara jerked her arm free, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Let me go, Edward. I'm not scared of you anymore. Edward's face softened for a moment, the walls around him cracking slightly. But it was brief, and just as quickly, his hardened exterior returned. He stepped back, his gaze darkening. Fine, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. If you want the truth so badly, then come with me. But you won't like what you find. Clara's heart raced, but there was no turning back now. She nodded, her resolve firm. Lead the way. The two of them moved through the building, the darkness swallowing them as they walked deeper into the labyrinth of rooms. Clara's mind raced, trying to piece together everything she had learned so far. Her mother's strange behavior, Edward's sudden appearance, the mysterious building, they were all connected. But how? They stopped in front of a door at the end of a narrow corridor, and Edward paused for a moment, his hand hovering over the doorknob. He turned to Clara, his face unreadable. This is it, he said, his voice strained. Once we go in there, there's no turning back. Clara swallowed, a knot tightening in her stomach. She nodded, her throat dry. Edward opened the door slowly, revealing a room that looked nothing like the rest of the building. It was clean, almost sterile, and there was a large table in the center of the room covered in papers, photographs, and other documents. But the most chilling thing was the wall, covered in maps, lines connecting various points, and pictures of people Clara recognized. Who are all these people? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. These are the people who've been pulling the strings, Edward replied, his tone grim. They've been controlling everything, every part of our lives. And your mother. She was their greatest asset. Clara's mind reeled. What are you talking about? Why would Mum work for them? She wasn't like that. Edward looked at her, his expression pained. She didn't have a choice, Clara. She got involved with them long before you and I were born. They made her a promise she couldn't refuse. And now? He trailed off, a heavy silence filling the room. Clara's eyes scanned the room, taking in the maps and photographs. Her heart sank as she recognized some of the faces. The same people who had been part of the strange dealing she had overheard, the people who had been watching them for years. This is a conspiracy, Clara murmured, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. They've been controlling everything from the beginning. Edward nodded. And they'll stop at nothing to keep the truth hidden. Your mother tried to protect you, but I don't know how long she'll be able to stay hidden. They'll find her, and if they do, it's over. Clara felt a chill run through her. What do we do now? Edward's gaze darkened. We stop them. We expose the truth before they can erase everything. But first, we need to find your mother. Clara's resolve hardened. She had come this far, and now there was no turning back. She would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized just how dangerous this path could be. The forces she was up against were powerful, and they wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who got in their way. And Clara knew that the final betrayal, the one that had been lurking in the shadows all along, was closer than ever. Clara followed Edward through the corridors of the building, her steps quiet but filled with anticipation. Her heart raced as the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on her chest. The truth she sought felt within her grasp, yet she couldn't shake the unease that crept over her. Each step brought her closer to the unknown, and with it, a sense of dread. They reached another door, this one more solid and imposing than the rest. Edward hesitated before opening it, glancing back at Clara. His face was a mixture of resolve and something darker, a shadow of regret, perhaps, or guilt. This is it, he said, his voice almost a whisper. Once we enter, nothing will be the same. Clara nodded, her jaw clenched. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Edward, not of what was behind that door. The only thing she feared now was the truth itself. Edward pushed the door open, revealing a dimly lit room, the walls lined with filing cabinets and more photographs. In the center of the room was a single desk, papers strewn across it in chaotic disarray. Clara's eyes immediately fell on a large photo pinned to the wall, a picture of her mother, standing with a group of unfamiliar people. The photograph had been taken years ago, but there was something unsettling about the look on her mother's face. It was one Clara had never seen before, a look of determination, but also fear. This is where it all began, Edward said, his voice breaking the silence. This is where your mother's life changed forever. Clara's throat tightened. What do you mean? Edward motioned to the photo. Your mother was part of something bigger. A group that controlled everything. The media, businesses, politics. She was their most valuable asset. And when she tried to escape, they didn't let her. They made sure she stayed in line. They made sure she stayed hidden. Clara's eyes widened as she took in the scope of it all. But why? Why didn't she ever tell me? Edward lowered his gaze, and Clara could see the sorrow in his eyes. She wanted to protect you. She didn't want you to get caught in this. She thought if she stayed hidden, you'd be safe. Clara felt her heart sink. She had spent so many years resenting her mother, hating her for abandoning them. But now she understood. Her mother had never left. She had been forced to disappear. Forced into hiding to protect her family from a force so powerful that it controlled every aspect of their lives. Where is she now? Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Edward hesitated, his hand tightening into a fist. I don't know. But I'll help you find her. I promise. We need to expose them, Clara. We need to take them down before they can hurt anyone else. Clara nodded, the fire of determination reigniting in her chest. She was no longer the confused, angry girl who had first stepped into this building. She was a woman on a mission. A woman who had discovered the truth. And now, nothing was going to stop her from seeing it through. Edward led her to a hidden room behind the desk, where a series of documents were stacked, each one detailing the secret activities of the group her mother had been involved with. There were names, dates, locations, everything Clara needed to finally understand the full extent of the conspiracy. "This is the proof," Edward said, his voice steady now. "With this, we can bring them down." Clara reached for the documents, her hands trembling with a mixture of excitement and fear. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of control. She had the power to change everything. To expose the people who had ruined her mother's life, and her own. As she picked up the papers, she glanced back at Edward, who was watching her with a sense of admiration, mixed with something else, an unspoken bond between them. They had both been trapped in this web for far too long, but now they had the key to break free. "Let's do this," Clara said, her voice resolute. Together, they stepped out of the room, determined to bring justice to the woman who had sacrificed everything for them. It was time to face the truth, to confront the people who had orchestrated their pain. And no matter the cost, Clara knew she would fight until the end. But as they moved forward, there was one final chilling thought that crossed Clara's mind. There was always a price for uncovering the truth. And some truths once revealed could never be undone.